She spilled coffee on the most dangerous man in the kingdom, a vampire king who'd fired 100 nannies in 7 months because his baby son terrified them all. He didn't punish her. Instead, he offered her a job she couldn't refuse. What he didn't know, her unbreakable heart was exactly what his broken child needed to survive. Mara Ilian's hands trembled as she balanced the silver tray of steaming coffee cups. Not from fear. She'd stopped feeling that emotion 3 years ago when her ex-husband cleaned out their bank account and disappeared. No, her hands shook because she'd worked a double shift. Her feet screamed in her worn sneakers, and her 4-year-old son Theo was home with a neighbor who charged by the hour. The grand hall of Bloodhaven Palace glittered like something out of a fever dream. Crystal chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings, their light catching on the pale skin of vampire nobility who moved through the crowd with predatory grace. Human ambassadors from Washington clustered near the buffet tables, their heartbeats audible even over the string quartet. More coffee for the king's table, the head server hissed, shoving Mara toward the raised dais. Mara's heart didn't even flutter. She'd served worse customers at the all-night diner on Highway 9. King Darius Valorian sat at the center of the table, his presence a cold weight that seemed to press against every living thing in the room. He was young, maybe 30 in human years, though she'd heard he was over 2 centuries old. Dark hair fell across sharp cheekbones, and his eyes held the peculiar stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike or ignore you. He was currently ignoring the French ambassador's enthusiastic speech about unprecedented cooperation between species. Mara approached the table, her mind already calculating. Serve from the left. Never make eye contact. Get out fast. Her shift ended in 20 minutes. She had to pick up Theo, get home, pay Mrs. Chun, maybe sleep 3 hours before her morning shift at the diner. The vampire duchess beside the king laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and gestured wildly. Her elbow caught the edge of Mara's tray. The world slowed. Coffee cups tilted, hot liquid arcing through the air in a perfect, catastrophic wave. Mara lunged forward instinctively, trying to catch the tray, redirect it, do anything. Scalding coffee splashed across King Darius's chest and lap. The entire hall went silent. Even the quartet stopped mid-note. Every vampire in the room turned to look at her. Dozens of ancient eyes, suddenly sharp and focused. Several nobles rose from their seats, their movements too fluid to be human. The human ambassadors backed away slowly, hands raised in surrender as if distancing themselves from her inevitable death. Mara's mind went blank for one precious second. Then her waitress training kicked in, that autopilot that got you through spills, angry customers, and impossible situations. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice steady. She grabbed napkins from a nearby table and stepped forward, actually forward, toward the king, pressing them against the worst of the spill. The coffee was 195 degrees. "You need cold water immediately to prevent." She stopped. He was staring at her, not with rage, not with the promise of violence, but with something else entirely. Curiosity, maybe. Or confusion. "You're not afraid," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried through the silent hall like a knife through silk. Mara blinked. Was she supposed to be? Probably. But fear required energy she didn't have. "I'm a single mom who works 3 jobs," she said, still dabbing uselessly at his shirt. "I've been screamed at by drunk truckers, threatened with termination 5 times this month, and I once delivered my own son in a bathtub because I couldn't afford the ambulance. Your Majesty, with respect, you're going to have to get in line." Someone gasped. The Duchess made a strangled sound. King Darius's lips twitched. It might have been a smile. Then a shriek shattered the moment. A young woman in a gray uniform burst through the servants' entrance, her face streaked with tears and blood. Her hands were covered in scratches, some still bleeding. She ran straight past the guards, past the nobles, stumbling in her desperation to escape. "I can't. I won't go back in there," she sobbed, making for the main doors. "That thing, it's not a child, it's a demon. It's cursed." 2 guards caught her before she reached the exit, but her screams continued. 103. I'm number 103. Someone else can die in that nursery. The human ambassadors exchanged alarmed glances. The French ambassador leaned toward his aide, whispering urgently. King Darius rose from his seat with terrible slowness. Coffee dripped from his formal jacket, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes had gone completely black. No iris, no white, just endless dark. Take her to the infirmary, he said softly. Pay her the full year's salary we promised. She's free to go. He looked around the hall, his gaze touching on each noble, each ambassador, each servant. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Mara's bones ache. This banquet is concluded. Leave. The room emptied in under a minute. Even the vampire nobles didn't argue. Mara found herself alone in the grand hall with the vampire king, standing in a puddle of spilled coffee, still holding a handful of soaked napkins. You, Darius said, turning those black eyes on her. You didn't run. I'm still on the clock, Mara said. The absurdity of her situation was starting to penetrate. And I need this job. What's your name? Mara Ilian. Look, I'll pay for the jacket. It might take a while, but I'll... Do you have children, Mara Ilian? The question stopped her cold. Every instinct screamed not to answer, not to give a monster any information about Theo. But something in his voice, desperation, maybe, or exhaustion that mirrored her own, made her tell the truth.
Assons.
He's 4-inch. Darius stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her more than anything else that evening. He smiled. A real smile, sad and tired and achingly human. Good, he said. Then you understand what it means to protect something precious, no matter the cost. From somewhere deep in the castle, a baby began to cry. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that felt worse. King Darius's jaw tightened. Without another word to Mara, he turned and strode toward a side corridor, his wet jacket leaving a trail of coffee drops on the marble floor. Mara should have left. Should have collected her wages, picked up Theo, and forgotten this entire nightmare of an evening. Instead, she found herself following the vampire king through shadowed hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced rulers, their painted eyes seeming to track her movement. They descended a spiral staircase into what Mara realized was some kind of war room. Ancient maps covered the walls, marked with territories and battle formations from centuries past. A massive table dominated the center, carved from a single piece of black wood. 3 figures waited there, each radiating the kind of power that made the nobles upstairs look like children playing dress-up. Finally, the tallest one said. He wore military decorations across his chest, medals from wars Mara had only read about in history books. We heard the commotion. Another nanny? General Thorne, Darius acknowledged, moving to the head of the table. He still hadn't changed his coffee-stained clothes. General Kasha. General Vex.
I didn't summon you.
No, but we need to talk about the situation. This came from the woman, General Kasha. Her red hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held no warmth. 7 months, Darius. 103 nannies. The human governments are starting to ask questions. The nobles are calling your heir cursed. My son is not cursed. Then explain why every caretaker we've hired ends up either catatonic or running from the palace screaming about demons. The 3rd general, Vex, leaned forward. The child is clearly defective. Dangerous. Mara pressed herself against the wall near the entrance, suddenly very aware she was witnessing something she absolutely should not be seeing. But no one had told her to leave, and the door had locked behind them with an audible click. Choose your next words carefully, Vex, Darius said quietly. We're proposing a solution, General Thorne continued, as if his colleague hadn't just called the prince defective. Isolate the child. Magical feeding only, no human contact necessary. We can hire mages to sustain him until he's old enough to control whatever abilities he possesses. You want to raise my son in a cage? Darius's voice dropped even lower. Feed him magic like livestock. We want to protect the kingdom, Kasha snapped. Your personal feelings about the boy don't change the fact that he's become a political liability. The human ambassadors tonight were terrified. If they report back that the heir to the vampire throne is an unstable monster. He is a baby. He's a threat to everything we've built, Vex stood, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. The peace between species. The stability of the court. Your own reign. The nobles are already whispering about your judgment. How long before someone decides that perhaps the Valorian line has ruled long enough? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Are you threatening me, Vex? Darius asked. In my own castle? We're offering reality, Thorn said, standing as well. Kasha followed suit. 3 vampire generals, unified against their king. Accept our solution, or we'll be forced to bring this matter before the full council. They'll vote to remove the child from your care. Possibly remove you from the throne entirely. The council serves at my pleasure. The council serves the kingdom, Kasha corrected. And right now, you're not acting in the kingdom's interest. You're acting like a sentimental fool. Mara saw it before it happened, the subtle shift in Darius's posture, the way his fingers flexed at his sides. She'd seen that same barely controlled rage in her ex-husband before he'd put his fist through their bedroom wall. But Darius didn't punch walls. He moved. One moment the generals were standing at the table, confident in their numbers and rank. The next, Darius was simply there, faster than Mara's eyes could track. His hand closed around General Vex's throat, and the ancient vampire combusted from the inside out. Flames erupted through his eyes, his mouth, consuming him in seconds. Ash drifted to the stone floor. General Kasha drew her sword, but Darius caught her wrist and twisted. The bone snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Before she could scream, he placed his palm against her chest and she exploded into flame, burning so bright Mara had to shield her eyes. General Thorn ran for the door. Darius was faster. He grabbed the general by the back of his decorated jacket and slammed him into the war table hard enough to crack the ancient wood. You want to talk about threats? Darius whispered, flames dancing in his palm inches from Thorn's face. Let me clarify something. He pressed his burning hand against the general's chest. The screaming lasted 5 seconds before it cut off abruptly, leaving only the soft sound of ash settling on stone. Darius straightened, brushing dust from his hands. The coffee-stained jacket was now also covered in ash. He looked almost absurdly calm as he walked to the ceremonial brazier in the corner and swept the 3 piles of ash into it with his boot. Then he turned and finally seemed to notice Mara standing frozen by the door. You're still here, he observed. Mara's voice came out steady, which surprised her. The door locked. He studied her face, searching for something. You saw everything. Yes. And you're not running. Mara thought about the general's words. About a baby alone in a nursery, crying in the dark. About 103 people who'd run away because they were too broken to help someone smaller and more broken than themselves. I've seen worse, she lied. Darius's expression shifted into something almost like respect. He walked to a cabinet, retrieved a crystal decanter, and poured himself a drink. I just killed 3 of the most powerful vampires in my kingdom. They threatened your son. Yes, he drank. They did. Then they were stupid, Mara said simply. I would have done the same thing. For the first time that night, King Darius Valorian smiled at her like she was an equal. Good, he said. Because tomorrow morning, I'm offering you a job.
Mara didn't sleep that night.
She lay in her cramped apartment, listening to Theo's soft breathing from the mattress they shared, and tried to process what she'd witnessed. 3 vampire generals turned to ash. A king who moved faster than lightning. And somewhere in that vast palace, a baby who'd driven over 100 people to madness.
She should run.
Take Theo and disappear into some small town where vampires were just stories and kings didn't know her name. But her bank account had $43. Rent was due in 6 days. And Mrs. Chun had just raised her rates. At dawn, someone knocked on her door. 2 palace guards stood in the hallway, their formal uniforms looking absurd in her rundown building. The neighbors were already peeking through cracked doors, whispering. Miss Ilian, the taller guard said. His Majesty requests your presence. I have a shift at the diner in an hour. It's been handled. Your employer has been compensated for your time. Mara looked back at Theo, who was eating cereal at their tiny table, oblivious to the armored vampires in the doorway. I need to take my son to daycare. Arrangements have been made. A car is waiting. Everything happened too fast after that. A black car that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Theo's delighted chatter about the cool seats, while Mara's stomach twisted into knots. The palace gates opening like a mouth swallowing them whole. But instead of a servant's entrance, they were escorted through the main doors, down corridors lined with priceless art, until they reached a pair of towering doors carved with intricate battle scenes. The throne room. It was empty except for King Darius, who sat not on the massive throne but on its steps, looking exhausted. He'd changed clothes, black shirt, no jacket, like he'd given up on formality. When he saw Theo clinging to Mara's hand, his expression softened slightly. Miss Ilian, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? No, he admitted. But I appreciate the illusion of cooperation. He stood, descending the steps. I'll be direct. I'm offering you the position of royal caretaker for my son. The salary is $200,000 a year, plus housing in the palace, full medical coverage for you and your child, and protection under royal decree. Mara's brain stuttered. $200,000. She currently made $23,000 working 3 jobs. You're insane, she said. Probably. But I'm also desperate. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human it was jarring. You saw what happened last night. You know what the generals said. My son has gone through 103 caretakers in 7 months. Most quit within days. Several are in psychiatric care. And I don't understand why. Maybe because he's a vampire baby who does something to their minds. He's 6 months old. He can't even sit up on his own yet. Darius's voice cracked slightly. But you're right. Something happens to everyone who tries to care for him. They become terrified. They see things. They run. And you think I'll be different. I think you stood in a room and watched me execute 3 generals without flinching. I think your heartbeat didn't change when I mentioned my son. Every other human I've interviewed has a fear response just hearing about him. He stepped closer, his black eyes intense. You're either incredibly brave or too exhausted to feel fear anymore. Either way, you're my last option. Mara looked down at Theo, who was now exploring the throne room, running his small hands along the marble columns. What happened to his mother? Pain flashed across Darius's face. She was human. She died during childbirth. The pregnancy was difficult. We didn't know the strain it would cause until it was too late. I'm sorry. So am I. He pulled out a formal document from his pocket. This is the contract. You can have lawyers review it. The terms are non-negotiable, but they're fair. You would start immediately. I haven't said yes. I know, he held her gaze. But you will.
Because you need the money, yes.
But also because you're curious now. You want to know what could terrify 103 people. He was right, and Mara hated that he was right. I want to see him first, she said, before I decide. Darius nodded slowly. Follow me. They walked through the palace, Theo skipping between them, asking a million questions that neither adult answered. Finally, they reached a wing that felt different, quieter, colder. Guards stood at every intersection, their hands on their weapons. The nursery door was reinforced steel disguised as wood. Claw marks gouged deep into its surface. Wait here, Darius said to the guards. He looked at Mara. I should warn you. Just open the door.
He did.
The nursery was beautiful. Soft blue walls, hand-painted stars on the ceiling, toys that probably cost more than cars. Moonlight crystals hung from silver chains, casting gentle light across an ornate cradle. And in that cradle, a baby was crying, not screaming, not wailing, just a soft, heartbroken sound that made Mara's chest ache. She walked forward without thinking, leaving Darius frozen in the doorway. She reached the cradle and looked down. The baby was small, with dark hair like his father and eyes that were currently scrunched shut in misery. His tiny fists waved in the air, seeking someone to hold. Mara picked him up. The crying stopped instantly. The baby opened his eyes, pale gray, not black, and stared at her with an intensity that shouldn't be possible for someone so small. His tiny hand reached up, touching her cheek. And Mara felt nothing. No fear.
No vichins.
Just a warm weight in her arms, and the familiar feeling of holding something fragile that depended entirely on you not dropping it. Behind her, Darius made a sound like he'd been punched. How, he whispered. You're the first person he stopped crying for. Ever. Mara looked down at the prince, who was now making soft cooing sounds, his fingers wrapped around a strand of her hair. Where do I sign? She said. The first 2 days were easy. Almost suspiciously so. Mara moved into the caretaker's suite, 3 rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, with a separate bedroom for Theo. The palace staff watched her with barely concealed curiosity, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. The vampire nanny who lasted 2 whole days. The human who doesn't understand what's coming. But the baby prince, Alexander, she learned, though Darius called him Alec, remained calm in her presence. He ate, slept, and gurgled like any normal infant. Theo was delighted to have a baby brother and spent hours making faces at the prince through the cradle bars. Mara started to wonder if everyone else had been overreacting. Then came the 3rd night. She woke at 2 a.m. to silence. Not the normal silence of sleeping children, but the heavy, waiting silence that precedes something terrible. The kind of quiet that made prey animals freeze. Soft whimpering drifted from the nursery. Mara pulled on her robe and padded across the cold floor. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting silver patterns across the walls. The moonlight crystals above Alec's cradle pulsed with a gentle rhythm designed to calm vampiric minds, some kind of ancient magic she didn't fully understand. The prince lay in his cradle, eyes wide open, tears streaming down his small face. But he wasn't crying, just staring at something invisible, his tiny body rigid with fear. Hey, sweetheart, Mara whispered, reaching down to pick him up. The moment her hands touched him, the world shifted. She was standing in a different nursery, no, the same nursery but before. A young woman with red hair stood over the cradle, smiling. Nanny number 67, Mara's mind supplied, though she had no way of knowing that. The woman's smile faltered. Her hands began to shake. Then Mara saw what the woman saw. Her younger sister, 12 years old, drowning in a lake while the nanny, then just a teenager herself, stood frozen on the dock, too afraid to jump in. The memory played with crystal clarity. The small hands breaking the surface. The bubbles stopping. The guilt that followed, thick and choking. The vision shifted. An older man, nanny number 42, reaching for the baby. His memory, standing over his dying wife's hospital bed, holding the DNR form, signing it with shaking hands while she gasped for air. The relief he'd felt when it was over. The shame of that relief. Another shift. A middle-aged woman watching her own daughter walk away, suitcase in hand, saying she never wanted to see her mother again. The empty house. The wondering what she'd done wrong. On and on. Trauma after trauma, each memory playing through Alec's consciousness like a movie he couldn't stop watching. 103 people's worst moments, their deepest shames, their most carefully buried pain. Mara understood suddenly, with perfect clarity, what was happening. The prince wasn't causing the fear. He was absorbing it. Every person who held him brought their trauma with them, invisible and unspoken, and his infant mind, too young to understand, too sensitive to block it out, took it all in. He became a mirror for their pain, reflecting it back amplified until they couldn't bear to be near him. But Mara felt nothing. The visions washed over her like water off glass. She saw them, remembered drownings and failed marriages and dying parents and abandoned children, but they weren't hers. They had no hooks to catch on, no matching wounds to reopen. Because Mara had already processed her trauma. had already looked her worst moments in the eye, her husband's betrayal, the loneliness, the terror of single motherhood, and decided to keep living anyway. She'd cried, screamed into pillows, spent nights wondering how she'd survive. And then she'd survived. There was nothing left for the prince to reflect. No hidden pain to magnify. Just a tired woman who'd already faced her demons and learned they couldn't kill her. The visions faded. Alec's tiny body relaxed in her arms. His eyes, which had been wide with reflected terror, slowly closed. His breathing evened out into the soft rhythm of infant sleep. Mara held him against her chest, swaying slightly, humming a lullaby her own mother had sung. The moonlight crystals pulsed above them, but she didn't need their magic. The prince was finally, deeply, peacefully asleep. "You poor thing," she whispered. "All those broken people, and you had to feel everything they were hiding." She understood now why the previous nannies had fled. Confronting your worst memories at 2 a.m. while holding a baby would break anyone who wasn't ready. Anyone who'd been hired for money rather than love. Anyone who still had wounds that hadn't healed. But Mara's wounds were scars now. Permanent, visible, but no longer bleeding. Behind her, the nursery door creaked open. Darius stood in the doorway, still dressed despite the late hour. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I heard." He stopped, staring at the scene. "He's sleeping." "He had nightmares," Mara said quietly, still swaying. "Not his nightmares. Everyone else's." Darius stepped closer, his face illuminated by moonlight. "You saw them?" "Yes. And you're still here." "Where else would I be?" Mara looked down at the sleeping prince. "He's just a baby who feels too much. That's not a curse. That's a gift nobody knew how to handle." Something in Darius's expression cracked. For a moment, he looked less like a vampire king and more like an exhausted father who'd been carrying an impossible weight alone. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't think." I'd almost started to believe they were right. That something was wrong with him. "Something's wrong with the world," Mara corrected. "He's perfect." She placed Alec back in his cradle. The prince sighed contentedly, one small fist curling near his face. From that moment, Mara knew she wasn't leaving. Not for any amount of money, but because this broken baby needed someone equally broken and healed. Absolutely not. Dr. Corvain, the head vampire physician, stood with his arms crossed, blocking the nursery door like a well-dressed gargoyle. 3 other medical staff flanked him, their pale faces set in identical expressions of aristocratic disapproval. "The prince's development is at a critical stage," Dr. Corvain continued, his tone suggesting he was explaining something to a particularly slow child. "Exposure to direct sunlight could distort his vampiric physiology, weaken his natural immunities, possibly even cause permanent damage." Mara adjusted Alec in her arms, the baby cooing happily at her chin. "He's half human. Human babies need sunlight, vitamin D, fresh air. He is the vampire heir to the throne."
His human half is
regrettable but secondary. "His human half is why he's alive," Mara snapped. "And I'm taking him outside. King Darius would never approve." "Then let's ask him." Mara turned to find Darius already standing in the hallway, apparently drawn by the commotion. He looked between his medical staff and his son's caretaker with an expression of carefully controlled exhaustion. "Your Majesty," Dr. Corvain began, "surely you see the danger." "I see a 6-month-old who's spent his entire life in artificial light," Darius interrupted. He studied Alec, who was now grabbing at Mara's necklace with single-minded determination. "What are you proposing, Miss Ilian?" 30 minutes in the garden. Morning sun, not midday. I'll keep him in the shade if he shows any discomfort." The physicians looked horrified. One actually gasped. Darius was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do it." "Your Majesty." "My son will not grow up afraid of the sun." His tone left no room for argument. "Miss Ilian has my permission." 20 minutes later, Mara carried Alec through the palace's rear entrance into the gardens. Theo ran ahead, already chasing butterflies through the manicured hedges. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of roses and something earthier, rich soil and growing things. Alec's eyes went wide. Mara had expected fear, maybe crying. Instead, the prince stared at everything with an intensity that was almost comical. His head swiveled, trying to take in the sky, the trees, the fountain bubbling in the distance. When a bird landed on a nearby branch and chirped, Alec let out a delighted squeal that made Mara laugh. "Yeah, that's a bird," she said, sitting on a stone bench beneath an old oak tree. Dappled sunlight filtered through the leaves, warm but not harsh. "Wait until you see what else is out here." A butterfly, iridescent blue and impossibly delicate, fluttered past. Alec's tiny hand reached out, fingers grasping at air. The butterfly landed on Mara's shoulder, wings opening and closing slowly. The prince made a sound of pure wonder. "Careful," Mara whispered, guiding his hand gently toward the butterfly. Soft touches. His fingers brushed the butterfly's wing. It fluttered away, dancing through the sunbeams, and Alec's laugh was the most beautiful sound Mara had heard in months. She looked up to find palace staff gathered at the windows. Dozens of them, servants, guards, advisors, all staring at the scene in the garden. Some looked shocked, others confused. A few were actually smiling, because the heir to the vampire throne was laughing, not absorbing anyone's pain, not reflecting trauma,
Just
being a baby, experiencing joy. Theo ran over, clutching a dandelion that had somehow survived the gardener's meticulous weeding.
look.
For the baby. Alec took the flower with both hands, immediately trying to eat it. "No, no," Mara laughed, gently extracting it from his mouth. "We don't eat the flowers." "Why not?" Theo asked. "Because," Mara paused. "That's actually a good question. Because they taste bad, I guess." She looked down at Alec, who was now completely content, one hand wrapped around her finger, the other clutching his slightly damp dandelion. His gray eyes were clear and bright.
No visions. No borrowed nightmares.
Just curiosity and simple happiness. "He's different out here," a voice said. Mara turned to find Darius standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching his son with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He's not different," Mara corrected. "He's just himself, without everyone else's damage getting in the way." Darius moved closer, sitting on the bench beside her. This close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "The previous nannies were all traumatized," he said quietly. "Weren't they?" "That's what you realize." "Yes. We hired them specifically for their credentials. Former nurses, experienced childcare workers. We ran background checks, verified references. We thought we were being thorough." "You were hiring broken people to care for an empathic child," Mara said. "Everyone's broken somehow. But some of us have learned to live with it. Others are still drowning in it." A breeze rustled through the oak leaves. Alec cooed, reaching up toward the dancing shadows. "They said he was cursed," Darius continued. "The nobles. They wanted to lock him away. The nobles are idiots." That earned her a surprised laugh. "You can't say that." "I just did." Mara adjusted Alec in her arms. "Your son isn't cursed. He's empathetic. He feels what others feel. That's not a curse. That's going to make him the best king this kingdom has ever had. Imagine a ruler who actually understands his people's pain." Darius looked at her with something like awe. "You really believe that?" "I know it." She watched Theo chase another butterfly, his laughter mixing with a fountain's gentle splash. "But first he needs to be a child. Not a political symbol. Not a monster. Just a baby who gets to play in the garden." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children. Staff members gradually stopped staring from the windows and returned to their duties, though Mara noticed several were smiling now. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Mara felt something she hadn't expected.
Peace.
300 miles north of Bloodhaven, in a manor that hadn't seen sunlight in 2 centuries, Lord Cassius Morven paced before a roaring fireplace. Despite the flames, the room remained cold. Vampires had no need for warmth, and Cassius preferred the chill. It reminded him of battlefields long past, when power was taken with swords instead of politics. "She's still there," Lady Primrose said from her chair, swirling wine that was definitely not wine in a crystal glass. 3 weeks now. The human waitress and her brat, living in the royal wing like they belong. "It's an embarrassment," Lord Cassius spat. "Darius parades his half-breed spawn around the gardens like some sort of pet. Takes advice from a peasant." The French ambassador's report said the king actually laughed at a dandelion. "The bloodline is compromised," added Duke Ravencroft, the youngest of the 3 conspirators. His family had held power for 8 centuries before the Valorians rose to dominance. The queen was human, the heirs defective, and now this. This waitress has more influence than the entire noble council. Lady Primrose set down her glass with a soft click. "We all remember what Darius did to the generals." A heavy silence fell. "Thorn was my uncle," Cassius said quietly. "He served the kingdom for 300 years. And Darius burned him like trash for suggesting the logical solution." "The king has lost perspective," Ravencroft agreed. "He's allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment. That child should have been isolated the moment the nannies started fleeing. Instead, he's permitted it to continue existing, threatening our standing with the human governments." "It's worse than that," Lady Primrose leaned forward. "I have sources in the palace. Staff members who aren't completely blinded by this domestic fantasy Darius is playing. The child is changing, growing stronger." The physician noted increased empathic abilities. "It's already reading emotions at 6 months old. Imagine what it could do at 6 years. 16-inch. A king who can feel his subjects' every emotion?" Cassius's lip curled. "That's not strength. That's weakness. We'll have a bleeding heart on the throne, making policy based on feelings rather than power." "The Valorian line has ruled for 4 centuries on strength and fear," Ravencroft said. "This child represents everything opposite to that legacy. It's tainted, contaminated by human weakness." Lady Primrose's eyes glittered. "The root of the problem isn't the child." "Meaning?" "The child was manageable when it had no attachment. When every caretaker fled in terror, it was isolated, controllable. But now..." She stood, moving to the window. "Now it has bonded with the human. She's the anchor. Remove her, and the child returns to its previous state. Darius will have no choice but to accept our solution." Cassius stopped pacing. "You're suggesting we eliminate the caretaker." "I'm suggesting we solve our problem efficiently." Lady Primrose turned back to them. "The king cannot burn every noble in the kingdom. He executed the generals because they threatened him directly, in his own war room. But an accident? A tragic incident in the human quarter, where his employee happened to be visiting her old neighborhood. He'd know," Ravencroft warned. "Darius isn't stupid. Of course he'd know. But he couldn't prove it. And more importantly, he'd be forced to choose. Hunt down every noble family who might have been involved, tearing the kingdom apart in the process, or accept the loss and move forward with our solution for the child." Lady Primrose smiled, cold and confident. "He chose his son over his generals. Let's see if he'll choose his son over his entire kingdom." Cassius moved to his desk, pulling out an encrypted phone. Modern technology, mixed with ancient power. "I know someone. The Ravenblood Syndicate. They specialize in discreet removals. Expensive," Ravencroft noted. "We'll split the cost." Cassius was already dialing. "And we'll make it look random. The human quarter isn't safe after dark anyway. Unfortunate that Miss Ilian was in the wrong place at the wrong time." The phone rang twice before a voice answered, raspy and cold. "Ravenblood." "I have a contract," Cassius said. "High priority. Target is currently under royal protection, but she maintains visits to the human quarter weekly. I'm sending specifications now. Price. Name it. 500,000. Gold, not currency. Timeline? 1 week.
Done.
Specifications to the usual address. This conversation never happened. The line went dead. Lady Primrose returned to her chair, looking satisfied. When do we tell the others? We don't, Cassius said firmly. The fewer who know, the better. After it's done, we present the council with the reality of the situation. The king's caretaker is dead, the child is unmanageable again, and the only logical solution is our original proposal. Isolation and magical feeding. And if Darius refuses? Ravencroft asked. Then the council votes to remove him. Cassius poured himself a drink. We have enough support now. Duke Winters, Countess Blackwell, half the Eastern families. They're all tired of watching our kingdom become a human daycare center. They want the old ways back.
Strength. Fear.
Power. To the old ways. Lady Primrose raised her glass. To the old ways. The others echoed. They drank in silence, none of them mentioning that the old ways had nearly destroyed the kingdom twice through civil war. None of them acknowledging that the peace Darius had built, the alliance with human governments, was the only reason their species wasn't hunted to extinction. Because power wasn't about logic. It was about control. And they'd lost control the moment a human waitress made the air laugh in a garden. That had to be corrected. Whatever the cost. Mara had forgotten what normal felt like. 3 weeks in the palace had been surreal. Servants bringing meals, Theo playing in rooms the size of basketball courts, sleeping without worrying about next month's rent. But normal had its pull. The need to feel like herself again, not some fairy tale character who'd accidentally stumbled into royalty. So on Saturday morning, she asked for permission to take Theo to the human market. I don't think that's wise, Darius had said, looking up from the stack of trade agreements on his desk. Alex slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby. The prince had started sleeping in his father's office during the day, content as long as Mara was somewhere in the building. I need to feel human for a few hours, Mara replied. Theo misses his friends. And I want to buy him an actual toy, not something that costs more than a car. Darius studied her for a long moment. Take guards. I don't need. You're the royal caretaker now. You take guards or you don't go. She'd compromised on 2 guards in plain clothes, following at a distance. They looked absurd trying to blend in, too well-fed, too alert, scanning every face like threats. But Mara ignored them, focusing instead on Theo's excited chatter as they walked through the market stalls. The human quarter was exactly as she remembered. Crowded, loud, smelling of fried food and exhaust fumes. Street vendors called out prices, children played soccer in alleys, and old men played chess on folding tables. It was chaotic and imperfect and beautifully, wonderfully normal. Mom, look. Theo dragged her toward a toy stall. They have the robot I wanted. The vendor, Mrs. Kim, who'd been there for 20 years, smiled in recognition. Mara, heard you got some fancy job. Looking good, honey. Thanks, Mrs. Kim. Mara picked up the robot, checking the price.
$15.
She could actually afford it without calculating whether it meant skipping meals. The realization made her throat tight. We'll take it, she said. While Mrs. Kim wrapped the toy, Mara felt the hair on her neck rise. That instinct you develop as a woman, the sense of being watched. She turned, scanning the crowd. Nothing. Just the usual market chaos. The guards were 30 feet back, maintaining distance. One was buying a newspaper to look casual. The other was very obviously not looking casual, his hand inside his jacket. Here you go, sweetie. Mrs. Kim handed Theo his robot. They moved deeper into the market. Theo wanted to see everything. The fish stall, the fruit vendor with a singing cockatiel, the man who made balloon animals. Normal kid things. Things they couldn't do in the palace. Mara was watching Theo laugh at a purple balloon giraffe when she felt it again. That wrongness in the air. She turned. 3 figures in dark clothes moved through the crowd, too purposeful, too focused. Not shopping. Hunting. The guards noticed at the same time. One spoke urgently into a hidden mic. The other moved toward Mara. Too slow. The attackers moved with supernatural speed, closing the distance in seconds. Shadow assassins. Vampires trained in the old ways, before peace treaties and politics. Their faces were hidden behind dark masks, but their eyes glowed with unnatural red light. They weren't coming for Mara. They were coming for Theo. The realization hit her with perfect, horrible clarity. Kill her child, break her, and the prince loses his anchor. The logic was brutal and efficient. Mara lunged forward as the first assassin reached for her son. She crashed into Theo, wrapping herself around him as the blade meant for his small body instead buried itself in her shoulder. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and consuming. She heard Theo screaming, felt his small hands clutching her shirt. The guards were shouting, drawing weapons. Market vendors scattered, people running and screaming. The assassin yanked the blade out, preparing for another strike. Stay down, Mara gasped to Theo, covering his body completely with her own. If they wanted him, they'd have to go through her. Literally. The blade descended and turned to ash mid-strike. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost spread across the pavement in spiderweb patterns. The air itself seemed to scream. Darius materialized in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Mara had seen him angry before, had watched him execute the generals with cold efficiency. But this was different. This was rage in its purest form, ancient and absolute.
He didn't speak.
Didn't give warnings or demand explanations. His hand closed around the first assassin's throat, and the vampire combusted. Not gradually, instantly. One moment a person, the next moment ash dispersing in the wind. The second assassin tried to run. Try being the operative word. Darius was there before the vampire took 2 steps, placing his palm against their back. They ignited from the inside, flames erupting through their mouth and eyes, burning so bright several market vendors had to shield their faces. The third assassin actually managed to draw a weapon, some kind of blessed blade that glowed with dark magic. They swung at Darius with professional precision. He caught the blade with his bare hand. It should have cut him, should have poisoned him with whatever dark magic it carried. Instead, the blade melted, metal running like water through his fingers. Then he grabbed the assassin's head, and there was a sound like breaking ice. The body hit the ground, lifeless. No ash this time. Just death, quick and final. The entire attack had lasted maybe 30 seconds. Darius turned to Mara, his black eyes wild, frost still clinging to his hair. Are you? His gaze locked on her bleeding shoulder. You're hurt. I'm fine, Mara managed, though her vision was starting to blur.
Theo.
I'm here, Mom. Theo's voice was shaking but strong.
I'm okay.
Darius knelt beside them, his hands surprisingly gentle as he examined her wound. We need to get you to the palace physicians.
Now.
The market is secure, his jaw was tight. And when I find out who sent them, I'm burning their entire bloodline to ash. The great courtroom hadn't been used in 40 years. It was a relic from older, bloodier times, a vast hall of black marble and iron, designed to hold trials that ended in executions. Torches lined the walls instead of electric lights, their flames casting dancing shadows across ancient bloodstains that no amount of cleaning could remove. Every noble family in the kingdom had been summoned. Not invited.
Summoned.
Mara sat in the gallery with Theo sleeping against her shoulder, her wounded arm in a sling. The palace physician had healed most of the damage with vampire blood, something she'd initially refused until Darius explained she'd lose use of the arm otherwise. Now it throbbed with a dull ache, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. Below, the nobles filled rows of stone benches, their faces ranging from confused to terrified. They'd been given no explanation, just orders to appear before the king at midnight. The massive doors slammed open. Darius entered flanked by 20 royal guards. But it wasn't the guards that made the nobles shrink back. It was the king himself. He'd shed any pretense of modern civility, dressed in the formal armor of old Bloodhaven, black plates etched with silver, a crown of twisted iron on his head. He looked like something from a nightmare, ancient and merciless. Behind him, 3 more guards dragged struggling figures in chains. Lord Cassius Morven, Lady Primrose, Duke Ravencroft. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Silence. Darius's voice cracked like thunder. The whispers died instantly. He ascended to the raised throne at the room's center. Not his comfortable modern throne, but the original one, carved from a single piece of obsidian, shaped like reaching claws. Kings had passed death sentences from that throne for centuries. 5 hours ago, Darius began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, assassins from the Ravenblood Syndicate attacked my son's caretaker in the human market. They targeted her child, a 4-year-old boy. The nobles exchanged glances. Some looked genuinely shocked, others carefully neutral. The attack was not random, Darius continued. The Ravenblood Syndicate doesn't work for free. Someone paid them. Someone with substantial resources and detailed knowledge of Miss Ilian's movements. He gestured, and a guard stepped forward carrying an ornate lockbox. Inside were papers, bank records, encrypted messages, transaction logs. My intelligence network is quite thorough, Darius said conversationally, though his eyes remained black and cold. Within 3 hours, we traced the payment. Gold bullion, transferred through 3 shell accounts. Very professional, very discreet. He picked up one of the documents. The payment originated from accounts controlled by Lord Cassius Morven, Lady Primrose, and Duke Ravencroft. The contract specified that Miss Ilian was to be killed, but if an opportunity presented itself to kill her child instead, that was acceptable. In fact, it was preferred. Maximum psychological damage. Lady Primrose lifted her chin defiantly despite her chains. We were protecting the kingdom from your poor judgment. That half-breed. Silence. The word physically pushed her back. Several torches extinguished from the force of his rage, then reignited with blue flames. Darius descended from the throne, moving with predatory grace toward the 3 conspirators. You contracted assassins to murder a child. A human child. To break his mother. To destabilize my heir. And you call this protection? The child is a political liability, Lord Cassius said, trying to maintain dignity. Your attachment to the human woman has compromised. My attachment? Darius laughed, a terrible sound. You think this is about attachment? This is about the future of our kingdom, about the treaty with human governments, about the peace we've built. He turned to address the assembled nobles. For those of you wondering what happens next, let me be clear. I am not asking for a vote. I am not seeking council approval. I am executing traitors. Duke Ravencroft's composure finally cracked. You can't. We have rights. We have. You have nothing. Darius's voice dropped to something quiet and infinitely more dangerous. You contracted the murder of an innocent child. You attacked someone under royal protection. You conspired against the heir to my throne. He looked up at the gallery, his eyes finding Mara's. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or an apology for what was about to happen. 3 weeks ago, I executed 3 generals who threatened my son, Darius said, returning his attention to the nobles. I gave them a chance to walk away, to simply accept my decision and move forward. They chose to threaten him instead. He circled the 3 conspirators like a shark.
But you
didn't threaten. You acted. You sent killers after a woman who has done nothing but care for my child. You tried to murder her son, a 4-year-old boy whose only crime was being born to a woman I employed. The council will never accept this, Lady Primrose hissed. Kill us, and you'll have civil war. Then let there be war. Darius stopped directly in front of her. I would rather rule ashes than compromise my son's safety for political convenience. He raised his hand, and it ignited with white-hot flame. Does anyone in this chamber wish to speak in defense of these 3? Darius asked, his voice carrying to every corner. Does anyone believe their actions were justified? Silence. The nobles stared at their hands, the floor, anywhere but the king's face.
No.
Darius turned back to the conspirators. Then hear your sentence. For conspiracy to commit murder, for attacking royal personnel, for endangering the heir, and for treason against the crown. He placed his burning hand on Lord Cassius's chest. The screaming lasted 5 seconds before the vampire turned to ash. Lady Primrose followed. Then Duke Ravencroft. 3 piles of ash on ancient marble. Darius faced the chamber, flames still dancing in his palms. My son's future is not up for negotiation. His caretaker is under my personal protection. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or even inconveniences her will join these 3-inch. He let the flames die. This court is concluded. Go home. And remember what you witnessed here tonight. The nobles filed out in absolute silence. 3 days after the executions, Mara woke to the sound of crying. Not Theo, she knew his cry intimately. This was Alec, but different. The sound cycled through emotions like someone spinning a radio dial. Joyful cooing. Frightened whimpers. Angry wails.
Sad hiccuping.
All within 30 seconds. Mara rushed to the nursery, her healing shoulder protesting the movement. Alec lay in his cradle, his small face contorted with confusion. His moods flickered across his features like shadows, smiling, then crying, then neutral, then terrified. His tiny fists clenched and unclenched rhythmically. Hey, sweetheart, Mara said softly, reaching for him. What's going on? The moment she lifted him, his emotions stabilized. Not happy, not sad.
Just come.
He stared at her with those penetrating gray eyes, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then his face crumpled, and he started crying again. Real crying this time, sustained and heartbroken. Because Mara was exhausted. Bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. The attack had drained something from her she didn't know how to refill. She kept seeing that blade descending toward Theo. Kept feeling the impact in her shoulder. Kept wondering what would have happened if Darius had been 30 seconds slower. And Alec was crying because she was sad. He was reflecting her emotional state like a mirror. Oh no, Mara whispered, understanding flooding through her. Oh, baby.
I am sorry.
She carried him to the rocking chair, settling carefully. Her mind raced through the past weeks, reframing everything she'd witnessed. The previous nannies hadn't been driven mad by Alec projecting fear. They'd been confronted with their own trauma, magnified and reflected back at them through an empathic infant. A woman grieving her sister's death would hold Alec, and he'd absorb that grief, reflect it back, creating a feedback loop of sorrow until she couldn't distinguish her pain from his. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Alec wasn't just reflecting emotions. He was copying them, learning from them, trying to understand what he felt pouring out of every person who touched him. Imagine being 6 months old and feeling 103 different people's worst traumas, one after another. No wonder he'd been labeled cursed. No wonder he'd driven trained professionals to madness. You don't feed on emotions, Mara said aloud, rocking him gently. You're trying to understand them. You're learning what it means to feel by copying what everyone else feels. Alec's crying softened to confused whimpers. And I've been so tired lately that you're learning exhaustion.
Fear.
Sadness. Mara felt tears on her own cheeks. I'm teaching you all the wrong things. A sound from the doorway made her look up. Darius stood there, still dressed in his formal clothes from whatever late-night meeting he'd been attending. He looked as exhausted as she felt. How long have you been there? Mara asked. Long enough. He entered the nursery, moving to the window. Dawn was beginning to break over Bloodhaven, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. What did you mean he's copying emotions? That's what the empathy is, Mara explained, adjusting Alec in her arms. He doesn't just sense what people feel. He experiences it himself. Like emotional echolocation. He's learning what anger feels like by absorbing someone's anger. What joy feels like by experiencing their joy. Darius turned from the window, his expression shifting from tired to horrified. Every nanny who held him was carrying unprocessed trauma.
Grief. Shame.
Fear, Mara nodded. And he absorbed all of it. 103 people's worst experiences, downloaded directly into an infant brain that has no context for understanding them. Dear God, Darius sat heavily in the other chair. I subjected my son to psychological torture for 7 months because I didn't understand what was happening. You didn't know. I should have known. I'm his father, his hands clenched on the armrests. I should have realized. Darius, Mara waited until he looked at her. I only figured it out because I'm broken in a specific way. Most people hide their trauma. They bury it. But I've already processed mine. I looked at it, accepted it, and moved on. That's why he doesn't reflect pain back at me. There's nothing hidden for him to magnify. Alec had stopped crying entirely now, watching his father with curious eyes. So, what do we do? Darius asked quietly. We teach him healthy emotions, Mara said.
Joy. Contentment. Love.
We let him copy those instead of trauma and fear. And we make sure the people around him are emotionally stable. That eliminates most of my court, Darius said with dark humor. Probably, Mara smiled slightly. But it means your son won't grow up carrying the emotional baggage of hundreds of strangers. He'll learn what it means to feel from people who actually know how to feel healthy things. Darius stood, moving closer. He reached out hesitantly, and Mara shifted Alec so his father could take him. The prince went willingly, his small hand immediately grasping Darius's finger. And Mara watched something extraordinary happen. Alec's face shifted through several expressions: confusion, curiosity, then something warm and content. He cooed softly, snuggling against his father's chest. What's he feeling? Darius whispered, barely breathing. Your love for him, Mara said softly. That's what you're feeling right now looking at him. And he's copying it, learning what love feels like. Darius's eyes closed. When he opened them, they were wet. I thought he hated me, that I'd created something that could only experience fear and pain.
No.
You created something that can understand what everyone around him feels. Once he learns to control it, to filter it, he'll be able to connect with people in ways no one else can. Mara stood, putting a hand on Darius's shoulder. Your son isn't cursed. He's going to change the world. In his father's arms, Alec yawned and drifted into peaceful sleep, learning for the first time what it felt like to be completely, unconditionally loved. Mara was reading Theo a bedtime story when the palace phone rang. Not her cell phone, the actual palace line that connected directly to the security office. The one that only rang for emergencies. Miss Ilian? The guard's voice was apologetic. There's a man at the main gate demanding to see you. Says he's your husband. We've checked his identification. Marcus Ilian. Mara's blood went cold. Ex-husband. And he has no business here. He's claiming parental rights. Says you kidnapped his son, and he's here to take him back. Like hell he is. Mara was already moving, tucking the blanket around Theo. Stay here, baby. Mommy needs to handle something. Is it, Daddy? Theo's voice was small, uncertain. He barely remembered Marcus. Had been too young when his father walked out. Don't worry about it. I'll be right back. She found Darius in his study, with Alec sleeping in the bassinet nearby. He looked up as she entered, immediately reading the tension in her posture. What happened? My ex-husband is at the gate. Mara's hands were shaking with anger. He left 3 years ago. Cleaned out our savings and disappeared. Now he's claiming I kidnapped Theo. Darius's expression darkened. Does he have legal grounds? He signed away his parental rights. I have the paperwork. He wanted nothing to do with us. Said being a father was too much responsibility. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I haven't heard from him in 3 years. Not a birthday card, not a phone call, nothing. Then why come back now? Darius stood, something dangerous in his movements. That was the question, wasn't it? Marcus had never wanted Theo. Had resented every diaper change, every sleepless night. Had blamed Mara for trapping him with a child he never asked for. He found out about my job, Mara said slowly, pieces clicking together. About me working for you. The executions were in the news. Every human in the kingdom knows the royal caretaker is a single mother from the human quarter. So, he's here for money. Or worse, Mara met his eyes. The anti-vampire extremists have been quiet since the treaty, but they're still out there. What better way to destabilize the royal family than to claim the heir's caretaker is an unfit mother? Start a custody battle. Drag my name through human courts. Make it look like you're employing someone who kidnapped her own child. Darius was already moving to the phone. Sebastian, have the man at the gate detained. I'm coming down. You don't have to, Mara started. He threatened your custody of Theo. That makes it my concern. Darius's voice was cold steel. You're under royal protection. That extends to your son. They found Marcus in the security office, pacing like a caged animal. He looked different than Mara remembered, thinner, harder, with the desperate edge of someone who'd made bad choices and was running out of options. When he saw Mara, his expression shifted into something calculating. There you are. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. No, you haven't, Mara said flatly. You haven't tried to reach me in 3 years. I want to see my son. You gave up that right when you signed the papers. Under duress, Marcus said quickly, too quickly, like he'd practiced this. You forced me to sign. I was young, scared. I didn't understand what I was doing. You were 26. You understood perfectly. Marcus's gaze flicked to Darius, who stood in the doorway radiating menace. And now you're shacking up with vampires? Exposing my son to these creatures? What kind of mother are you? The security guards tensed. One reached for his weapon. Darius raised a hand, stopping them. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. Mr. Ilian, let me be very clear about your situation. Miss Ilian is an employee of the royal household, which places her under my personal protection. Any legal action against her is an action against the crown. I'm a human in human territory, Marcus shot back. Your vampire laws don't apply. Actually, they do. The treaty grants me authority over any individual who threatens royal employees. Darius pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and held it up. These are your bank records for the past month. 3 deposits, each for $5,000, from accounts linked to the Human Liberation Front, a known extremist organization. Marcus's face went white. You were paid to come here, Darius continued, to cause exactly this scene, to create a custody dispute that would embarrass the royal family and cast doubt on Miss Ilian's character. He put the phone away. Unfortunately for you, I have better intelligence than your employers expected. You can't prove. I can prove everything. The question is whether you'd like to walk away now with a warning, or whether you'd prefer I file charges for conspiracy, attempted extortion, and affiliation with a terrorist organization. Darius stepped closer. The Human Liberation Front bombed a diplomatic convoy last year. 7 people died. Are you really willing to go to prison for them? Marcus looked between Darius and Mara, his desperation turning to trapped animal fear. I just wanted. You wanted easy money, Mara said. You've never wanted Theo. Not really. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to tell whoever hired you that the plan failed. And you're never going to contact me or my son again. And if I don't, then I will personally ensure your prosecution carries the maximum sentence, Darius said. 20 years in a human prison.
No parole.
I have that authority under the treaty. Marcus stared at him, finally understanding he was completely outmatched.
Fine, he spat.
Keep the brat. But when this whole thing falls apart, when your vampire king gets bored of you, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it, Mara said coldly. Security escorted Marcus out. Through the window, Mara watched him get into a beat-up car and drive away, taillights disappearing into the night. She exhaled shakily. Darius's hand settled gently on her shoulder. Are you all right? I will be, Mara said. Thank you. He won't bother you again. I'm having the Liberation Front dismantled as we speak. Mara turned to look at him. You'd start a political incident for me? I'd start a war for you, Darius said simply. You protect my son. I protect you. That's how this works. I want to show you something, Darius said 3 days later, appearing at the nursery door as Mara finished feeding Alec. If you're willing. Mara looked up from burping the prince. Show me what? A place I used to go. Before everything became complicated, His expression was unreadable. Somewhere outside the palace.
Just.
Somewhere quiet. Is this kidnapping? Because I feel like I should clarify the rules on kidnapping. That earned her a rare, genuine smile. Bring Theo. We'll make it a family outing. The word family hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. 30 minutes later, they were in an unmarked car driving north along the coast. No formal motorcade, no guards broadcasting their location. Just Darius driving, Mara in the passenger seat, and two boys in car seats in the back, one babbling about robots, the other making happy gurgling sounds. Where are we going? Mara asked as the palace disappeared behind them. You'll see. They drove for an hour, the cityscape giving way to forests and then to rocky coastline. Finally, Darius turned onto an unmarked dirt road that wound up through pine trees. At the top, he parked near a cliff edge. The view stole Mara's breath. Below them, the ocean stretched endless and dark, moonlight painting silver paths across the waves. The cliff itself formed a natural sanctuary, flat stones surrounded by pine trees, sheltered from wind, but open to the sky. Someone had built a small fire pit years ago, and a weathered bench faced the water. My wife and I used to come here, Darius said quietly, helping unbuckle Alec. Before she got sick. She said it was the only place where she could breathe. Mara hadn't heard him mention his wife before. What was her name? Elena, his voice was soft. She was a human rights lawyer from Seattle. Brilliant, stubborn, absolutely fearless, he smiled at the memory. She threatened to sue me the first time we met. I'd issued a decree she thought was discriminatory. She marched into my throne room with a briefcase full of legal precedents and told me I was violating treaty law. And you fell in love with her. Immediately. She was the only person who'd ever called me out like that. He lifted Alec from the car seat. She would have loved meeting you. You're the same kind of fearless. Mara felt her chest tighten. I'm not fearless. I'm just too tired to be scared. Same result, different motivation. Darius walked toward the cliff edge, Alec secure in his arms. She knew the pregnancy was dangerous. The physicians warned us, half-human, half-vampire children are rare for a reason. The strain on a human body is immense. But Elena refused to terminate. She said, his voice cracked slightly. She said any child brave enough to exist against those odds deserved a chance to live. Theo ran ahead, immediately fascinated by the fire pit. Can we make a fire, Mom? Please. Maybe. Stay away from the edge. Mara joined Darius at the cliff, close enough to hear the waves crashing below. She sounds incredible.
She was.
And she'd be furious with me for how I handled Alec's first months. He looked down at his son. Hiring people instead of bonding with him. Letting politics dictate parenting. Being so afraid of losing him that I couldn't properly protect him. You're protecting him now. Because you showed me how. Darius met her eyes. You walked into my life by accident, spilled coffee on me, and somehow became the most important person in my kingdom. The weight of that statement settled between them. Mara didn't know how to respond, so she did what she always did when emotions got complicated. She deflected. Theo, not so close to the edge, she called. But Theo wasn't near the edge. He was carefully stacking stones near the fire pit, his tongue poking out in concentration. And Alec, still in Darius's arms, was watching him with complete fascination. He loves your son, Darius observed. Theo's always wanted a sibling. Mara watched as Theo abandoned his stones to make faces at Alec. The prince responded with delighted squeals. I could never afford to give him one. Put Alec down, Mara said suddenly. On the blanket. Let them play together. Darius hesitated. He can't even crawl yet. So? Theo will teach him. They spread a blanket on the flat stone and placed Alec on his stomach. Theo immediately lay down beside him, chattering about everything and nothing. This is a rock, see? And that's the ocean. It's really big. Mom says we can't swim in it 'cause it's too cold, but maybe when it's summer. Alec listened with intense focus, his gray eyes tracking Theo's every movement. When Theo demonstrated how to roll over, flopping dramatically from back to front, Alec's entire face lit up. He tried to mimic the movement, managing to rock slightly to one side before giving up and giggling. "Did you see that?" Mara breathed. He tried to copy him. "He's copying joy," Darius said, wonder in his voice. "Real, uncomplicated joy." They watched as Theo taught Alec about rocks. "This one's smooth. Pine cones, kinda pokey but cool. And butterflies. They only live for like a month. Isn't that sad?" The vampire prince absorbed it all, laughing and reaching and experiencing the world through his 4-year-old teacher. At one point, Theo gently took Alec's hand and helped him grab a smooth stone.
"See?
You gotta hold it like this. When you're bigger, we can throw them in the water and make splashes." Alec held the stone like it was made of gold, examining it with complete wonder. Mara felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother wiping them away. "Your son is teaching my son how to be happy," Darius said quietly. "How to play. How to exist without carrying the weight of everyone else's pain." "They're teaching each other," Mara corrected.
Look."
Theo had curled up next to Alec on the blanket, both boys staring up at the stars. Theo's small hand rested protectively on Alec's stomach, and the prince's fingers curled around Theo's thumb. Brothers, Mara thought. Not by blood, but by something stronger. By the choice to protect each other. To teach each other. To grow up together against impossible odds. Darius's hand found hers in the darkness. She didn't pull away. Dawn was breaking over Bloodhaven when they returned to the palace. Mara carried a sleeping Theo while Darius held Alec, both children exhausted from their cliffside adventure. But instead of heading to their rooms, Darius led them to the royal balcony, the one overlooking the main courtyard where proclamations had been made for centuries. "What are we doing?" Mara whispered. "Something I should have done weeks ago." Darius nodded to a guard, who began ringing the ceremonial bells. Within minutes, the courtyard filled. Palace staff, nobles who'd survived the purge, human ambassadors staying for treaty negotiations, vampire council members, even citizens from the surrounding city. They gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, confused and curious. Mara's stomach dropped. "Darius, what?" "Trust me," he said quietly. The sun crept above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Darius stepped to the balcony's edge, still holding his son. The crowd fell silent. "For centuries, this kingdom has been built on a simple principle," Darius began, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Strength through power. Survival through fear. Purity of bloodline above all else." The vampire nobles shifted uncomfortably. "That principle nearly destroyed us. Twice through civil war. Countless times through isolation and stagnation." He looked down at Alec. "And it nearly destroyed my son." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 7 months ago, my heir was born. Half vampire, half human. The nobles called him cursed. Defective. A threat to our way of life. Darius's voice hardened. They were wrong. He turned slightly, gesturing to Mara. "This is Mara Ilian. She's a single mother from the human quarter. A waitress who spilled coffee on me and didn't apologize correctly. Who watched me execute generals and didn't run. Who took a blade meant for her son because she understands something our nobility has forgotten." The sun climbed higher, its light now touching the balcony. "She understands that true strength isn't about power or fear. It's about endurance, resilience, the ability to be broken and still choose to protect what matters." Darius's black eyes swept across the assembled crowd. "My son doesn't need caretakers who've never suffered. He needs someone who's survived suffering and came out whole on the other side." Mara felt every eye turn to her. Her instinct was to shrink back, to disappear. But Theo was waking up in her arms, and Alec was watching her with those knowing gray eyes, and she realized with startling clarity that she'd stopped being afraid somewhere along the way. "I executed 3 generals who threatened my son," Darius continued. "I executed 3 nobles who tried to murder Miss Ilian and her child. Some of you think I'm unstable, compromised by sentiment, weak." His voice dropped to something cold and absolute. Let me be clear. I would burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let anyone harm my son or the people protecting him. If that makes me weak in your eyes, then your definition of strength is worthless. The silence was deafening. But I'm not here to threaten you, Darius said, his tone softening slightly. I'm here to show you what the future looks like. He held up Alec, the baby prince blinking sleepily in the morning light. The sun touched Alec's face, and instead of recoiling or crying, the half-vampire infant smiled. Actually smiled at the sunrise. Gasps echoed through the courtyard. My son isn't cursed. He's empathic. He feels what others feel, learns emotions by experiencing them. Darius's voice filled with pride. Imagine a king who truly understands his people's suffering, who can sense injustice not through reports or statistics, but through direct emotional connection. That's not a curse. That's evolution. The human ambassadors exchanged glances, some nodding slowly. From this day forward, Miss Mara Ilian holds the title of Royal Guardian of the Air, a position that has never existed before and will never exist again after her. Darius looked at Mara, his expression softening. She is under my personal protection, with full authority over my son's care and development. Her word on matters concerning the prince supersedes council decisions, noble objections, and political convenience. The vampire nobles looked stunned. Several started to protest, then remembered the executions and fell silent. This title extends to her son, Theo Ilian, who will be raised alongside the prince as his companion and brother. Darius smiled slightly. Because my son needs to learn joy from someone who still knows how to feel it. Theo, now fully awake, waved at the crowd. Several people actually waved back, charmed despite themselves. Our kingdom stands at a crossroads, Darius continued. We can cling to old ways, bloodline purity, isolation, power through fear. Or we can embrace what my son represents, strength through understanding, power through connection, survival through evolution. He looked directly at the vampire nobles. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you how things are. Anyone who cannot accept this new reality is free to leave the kingdom. Anyone who actively opposes it will join the previous objectors in the ash pile. The message was clear. But for those willing to embrace change, Darius's expression softened. I promise you a future where humans and vampires don't just coexist through treaties, but actually understand each other. Where leadership means serving people, not ruling them through fear. Where my son, your future king, will know every subject's pain and fight to ease it. The sun was fully risen now, bathing the balcony in golden light. Alec reached toward it, fingers grasping at sunbeams. One by one, the staff in the courtyard knelt. Then the human ambassadors bowed. Finally, reluctantly, the vampire nobles followed suit.
Not out of fear this time.
Out of understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a kingdom choosing evolution over tradition, connection over power, hope over fear. Mara looked out over the bowing crowd, Theo in her arms, standing beside a vampire king and his empathic heir. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling waitress trying to survive one shift at a time. Now she was the guardian of a kingdom's future. And somehow, impossibly, that felt exactly right. Above them, the sun continued to rise over Bloodhaven, illuminating a new era.
The end.